Zoom recording, so here we are. So this is a very common picture today. This is a print screen picture of a national AST committee meeting the other day, and you will recognize some of the people on there. We've had information sessions for the national AST chairmen and chairwomen as we go along, and now we've come to these more general sessions. If you have questions or comments which were not answered during this webinar, on the home page, a little bit down on the home page, you will find something called a EUCAST subject related contact form, and by using that, your question will end up with the most appropriate steering committee member who will then answer your question in the most appropriate fashion. So this is the current, and quite honestly has been for quite some time, structure of EUCAST. In the middle there is a steering committee that has 5 annual meetings and which sort of makes sure that business is conducted and being moved forward. Any major decision is brought to the NAC chairs, to the general committee members, to general consultation before the decision is taken, but the actual business of the day is performed by the steering committee. And you'll have a look at that steering committee in a minute. There's then the national breakpoint committees, the committees that were before. We'll have a slide on those as well. And we have the general committee where we have one national representative from each country. Any country who wishes to have a general committee representative can have that and appoint one. And normally this would be the chairperson of the national AST committee. There are a number of subcommittees, and we will have a look at those in a minute. And then to one side, there is the EUCAST Development Laboratory, which picks up methodological problems, methodological development, new species, new agents, discalibration, etc., etc. So any methodological issues with the EUCAST methodology is normally dealt with by the EUCAST Development Laboratory in collaboration with the steering committee. So the final decision is always with the steering committee, but a lot of the background work is, as most of you will know, performed by the EUCAST Development Laboratory. And when you get new breakpoints for this species or that agent, they've always been tested and field tested by the EUCAST Development Laboratory and by the EUCAST Development Laboratory network of laboratories around the world. One of which may be your laboratory. There are laboratories in all over Europe that have signed up as network laboratories in Australia, etc., etc. So there are laboratories in the EUCAST network all over the globe. Some of these are specializing in Listeria, some are specialized in Kingella, one is specialized in Pasteurella multocida, etc., etc., and some are of a more general kind. We are very much dependent on our contacts with European agencies such as ECDC and ECDC networks, ECDC by itself, of course, and also the fact that EMA, the European Medicines Agency, accepts EUCAST as their breakpoint committee, both for new and existing agents. So we work closely together with EMA to set breakpoints for new agents, but also to validate breakpoints for existing agents. And then, of course, ESCMID is very important to us. ESCMID is our safe haven. ESCMID organizes EUCAST. ESCMID makes sure that the steering committee is unbiased, appoints the chairman, the scientific secretary, the clinical data coordinator, and the technical data coordinator. And whenever we're in trouble, which doesn't happen too often, we will go to the ESCMID executive committee and ask them to help solve whatever problem we have. ESCMID is also a financial guarantee for us to be able to provide to you everything free of charge. So an ECDC contract, together with the financial support from ESCMID, guarantees that you can have all our recommendations, all our guidelines, rapid AST directly from blood culture bottles, everything without having to pay or sign up or do anything to earn that trust, so to speak. So ESCMID is very important. The current EUCAST steering committee consists of Christian Giske, who's the chair. Christian couldn't be with us today because he's running a postgraduate course at Karolinska this week. John Turnage, who is hopefully asleep by now. He was part of this morning's meeting, which was sort of his early evening. Rafael Canton in Madrid, who's the clinical data coordinator, myself, who's the technical data coordinator, the webmaster, and the head of the EDL. So if you have any ideas about how the web should be organized or something that should be put on or taken off, you write an email to me and I will fix it. We have two PK/PD dedicated experts in Shampa Das from the UK and Joseph Meletiadis from Greece. And then we have Søren Gartemann, Christopher Lindemann, Alistair McGowan, and Gerard Lina, who represent their respective country national breakpoint committees. Gian Maria Rossolini represents the General Committee, so he's one of two General Committee representatives, and these two change every 2 years. And Jorge Sampaio is the other GC representative, and he's from Brazil. And then on occasion we have visiting members from NACs around the world, usually max one per meeting, but it means that any NAC in any country can ask to be represented at a specific meeting, and any NAC can apply for one of the two positions as General Committee representatives. So very many European countries have had a 2-year spell on the steering committee already since 2002 and onwards. This is the General Committee, and you can see that most countries that you would name are on here, especially from Europe and European hinterland, as it were. And these are the people you will contact in your country if you would like to have someone come and speak to you about how to implement this and that in your lab or in your setting. And you find all of them on the EUCAST webpage. This is actually a copy-paste from the EUCAST webpage. And you go to organization and then you choose General Committee, and they're all there. EUCAST subcommittees. There are 3 standing committees. The Antifungal Susceptibility Testing Committee led by Maiken Kavling-Arendrup. The Veterinary Susceptibility Testing Subcommittee led by Peter Damborg, and the Antimicrobacterial Susceptibility Testing Subcommittee led by Emmanuel Cambeau. All 3 of these committees are working hard to provide guidelines in their respective areas, and you will find all 3 of them have specific room on the website. There are a number of ad hoc subcommittees. They tend to come and go depending on what is needed. Intrinsic resistance and expert rules, MIC distributions and ECOFs, joint working group with CLSI on how to determine the disk content, suitable disc content of a disc for a new antibiotic, for example. You will all remember a publication in CMI on the relationship between the genetics and the phenotypics, if you like. And then there is an ad hoc subcommittee on anaerobic AST, which is now gearing up to become more active because of the advent of a disc diffusion susceptibility test method for fast-growing anaerobic bacteria. You don't want to read this, but these are the EUCAST objectives. I've summarized them here. To standardize susceptibility testing in Europe. I think we've managed to at least halfway achieve that. To harmonize breakpoints used in Europe, we've certainly achieved that. To determine breakpoints for new agents with EMA, we've been doing that for the last 15 years. To advise European agencies, to promote education and training, to promote quality assurance, and to work towards international consensus. And I think that you can safely say that EUCAST has addressed all of these points to a greater or smaller degree, and sometimes more during a certain point in time and sometimes less at another point in time. But all of them are very high up in our minds. These are the old committees that are still in existence: the BSAC in the UK, the CASFM in France, the CRG in Holland, DIN in Germany, NCCLS that changed its acronym and became CLSI, and then the Norwegian and the Swedish committees. They all exist. They have slightly changed their remits, but they are very important to EUCAST because that's where we have lots of expertise. Most of these committees have 10 to 15 highly specialized experts in various parts of susceptibility and susceptibility testing and antimicrobial resistance. So it's very important to us to be able to consult with the national experts whenever we are ready to take a decision. This map shows the implementation of EUCAST breakpoints and guidelines. It's updated at least once a year. I have recently sent it out, as you can see, in October 2020. And I've had some corrections back that have been implemented in this map. And you can see that most of the European countries are now green of one shade or another. All of the countries, barring maybe one or two or three, have a NAC, a National AST Committee. And you can see down at the bottom there that other countries, by other meaning countries outside of Europe or outside the map at least, also have instituted national AST committees. Why are these important? Well, they serve to train microbiologists and ID physicians inside their respective countries. They are better suited to do that than EUCAST as a central function. They have the language, they have the contacts, they have national meetings, and they can take the opportunity to make sure that colleagues on a national level can be continuously informed. So let's jump to some new agents that have been approved by EMA and which are under some sort of consideration by EUCAST at this point in time. Meropenem from Melinta, eravacycline, which is akin to tigecycline from Tetraphase, imipenem relebactam from Merck, delafloxacin, another fluoroquinolone from Menarini, and lefamulin from Nabriva with indication community-acquired pneumonia. All of these will appear in next year's breakpoint table, some of them with zone diameter breakpoints as well, and others are under development when it comes to zone diameter breakpoints, but they will eventually, all of them, appear in the table. Two new agents which didn't quite make it for a variety of reasons were plazomicin and omadacycline. Plazomicin because the company, EUCAST, went bust and was bought, and the agent was bought up by an Indian company called Cipla, and we're not quite sure what will happen with plazomicin on the European scene henceforth. I'm sure it will be available in India and large parts of Asia, but when it comes back to Europe is difficult to say. We had determined breakpoints for plazomicin, but we had to halt the process. We've started up the process again, and we're looking at some methodological issues. What would be the advantage of having plazomicin? Well, it deals with some very specific aminoglycoside resistance mechanisms and would therefore be an asset in some specific and very special situations. Omadacycline was withdrawn from the process by the company because they needed to institute, as far as I remember, they needed to go through some more clinical studies to gain the width of their clinical indications that they wanted. There are addenda to the clinical breakpoint table version 10.0. During 2020, we actually dealt with timocillin, we dealt with new agent cefiderocol, and we dealt with Haemophilus influenza for ceftolozane tazobactam that up till then lacked zone diameter breakpoints for ceftolozane tazobactam. We normally don't edit a table. So version 10 has not been edited since it was published on the 1st of January 2020. It becomes a bit muddled when you start editing a table during the year, and we've come to the conclusion that it's better to publish addenda for specific changes or add-ons needed during the year. We don't want to wait 12 months to make it possible for people to test timocillin or cefiderocol or ceftolozane tazobactam on Haemophilus influenza. So this is sort of our way of dealing with that problem, and it prevents us from having to deal with a new version of the table until we're ready to go the full Monty, so to speak. So version 11.0 will be published on the 1st of January 2021, and then the breakpoints and anything that pertains to timocillin, cefiderocol, and ceftolozane tazobactam and Haemophilus influenza will move into the version 11 table, and all the addenda will disappear, and actually the text, most of the text in those addenda will move into the rationale documents of those agents. That way, none of that good information is lost. Currently, or at least recently and currently, we have consulted on a number of agents and breakpoints. And this is a list directly from the website. And you can see that some of those consultations are ongoing and others have just been closed. So we've got fosfomycin breakpoint revision. That new breakpoint will go into the next table. It's a change of the fosfomycin enterobacterialis oral breakpoint for lower urinary tract infections. And we can have a closer look at that in a minute. Some technical fluoroquinolone breakpoint adjustments that will not excite anyone, so I'll just go by that. Chromobacter xylus oxidans have not previously had breakpoints from EUCAST, but has now been dealt with as a very specific and very multi-resistant and intrinsically resistant species. So you will have zone diameter breakpoints and MIC breakpoints for at least 3 agents henceforth. During this year, we've had a major piece of work dealing with meningitis breakpoints. These have been on consultation with estimate study groups and with you guys. The consultation closed on the 16th of October, and the breakpoints that have now been agreed are moving into the breakpoint table version 11.0. We did not have breakpoints for Bacillus species, and we've now developed Bacillus species breakpoint except for B. anthracis. And there are proposed clinical MIC breakpoints, and there is an AST method based on Muir-Hinton straight and sewn diameter breakpoints, and that consultation closed on September 2020, but I've left the document on there so everyone can read it all the way up till it's moved into the tables. Piperacillin and Tazobactam breakpoints, we will have a look at that. And also to remind you that if you want to comment as part of the consultation process, there is a specific form that we use for that, and there is always a link to that form. You write your comment, your affiliation, your name, whatever, your organization, and EUCAST will deal with every comment that comes in, and we will respond to every comment that comes in. So here are some of those. Let's start with the fosfomycin, which is still open. So you have time to say something if you want to, up till the 30th of November. The old breakpoint was for Enterobacterialis unspecific, and the breakpoint was 32.32, and the sewn diameter 24.24. The proposed new breakpoint is 8/8, and that is basically an adjustment to the wild type. And as you can see, the 24.24 of the sewn diameter breakpoint is actually not changed. We have more background material than we used to have. We have more E. coli than we used to have, and we have a better fundament basis for the new breakpoint. So 8/8 will separate E. coli into those that have resistance mechanisms, that have MICs greater than 8, and those that have not. Achromobacter xylosoxidans, we have looked at a flurry of agents, most of which are more or less inherently resistant. Piperacillin, Tazobactam, meropenem, and trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole are all pretty active. They've been given breakpoints, and you can see that mostly we've given them a clinical breakpoint which is equal to the ECOF, because no one really knows how far from the ECOF you can travel and still have clinical efficacy. So until we know, we better stick to a very conservative clinical breakpoint. I also want to say that these breakpoints that I'm now showing you are still up for discussion. They may be tweaked, one dilution hither or thither, so don't take it for absolute granted that you will recognize exactly these numbers once the table appears 1st of January. I can already now say that the trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole breakpoint has been moved from 0.06 to 0.125 to give one more dilution margin for methodological reasons. It won't have any complications as to what percentage of strains will be called resistant and which will be called susceptible, because there is quite a bit of margin in between the wild type and the non-wild type here. So it's more a sort of a safety thing to prevent you from having difficulties with reproducibility. These are the proposed Bacillus species breakpoints, and again I remind you that these are not valid for B. anthracis. They are mostly valid for Bacillus cereus, because Bacillus cereus is what normally turns up in infections that are deemed clinically relevant, and quite a few of those are for some reason or other orthopedic infections. Zone diameter breakpoints have been developed and will be part of the table once it gets published. So these are the meningitis breakpoints, and you can see that the pathogens to the left there are meningitis pathogens. You can see the agents that are relevant. You can see the current breakpoints in the fourth column and proposed breakpoints in the last but one columns, and then the ECOF in the very last column. And basically you can say that we have decided together with the support of the ESCMID study group on CNS infections to be very conservative when it comes to meningitis breakpoints. These agents are usually dosed at the maximum level anyway. There is very little room for increasing the dose. So none of these breakpoints have an I category. It's all susceptible or resistant. Piperacillin tazobactam is a problem drug, as you know, and the current breakpoint is 8/16 for Enterobacterales. We've decided to propose that the 16 is brought down to 8, that we have no in I category, that what we have perceived as the maximum dose is actually considered a standard dose, and that the lower dose times 3, 4.5 grams times 3, is dedicated to infections originating from the urinary tract and from the biliary tract, and that the standard dose is actually times 4 or times 3 with a prolonged infusion. That might or might not reduce the need for an ATU. That has not yet been decided. Up till now, the ATU has been 16 MIC and 17 to 19, if I remember correctly, for the zone diameters. Whether that goes away or not is too early to say, but the clinical breakpoint will be 8/8, and in the future piperacillin tazobactam will be either S or R. So breakpoint tables version 11, just to summarize what goes into the new table, what can you expect? Well, you can expect breakpoints for cefidrochol, temacillin, lefamulin, and fosfomycin oral. So those are some of the changes or add-ons. Meningitis dedicated breakpoints will be introduced for the relevant agents in a systematic manner. The dosing tab is always under revision. There are new agents that require new lines. There are old doses that have been changed because of new PK/PD information or whatever. So dosing tab is always reviewed, but you will easily see which lines have been changed because they are colored in a specific way to mark that change. Diffusion criteria, new zone diameter breakpoints for cefazolin on Enterobacterales, that used to be in progress. And then, of course, Haemophilus influenza and ceftolozane tazobactam, meropenem-vaborbactam and imipenem-relebactam. We think we will have time to introduce those into the next table. Otherwise, they will have to go into an addendum once we are ready to go. We're having some problems with meropenem-vaborbactam diffusion, but we think we will solve it in time for the breakpoint table, but no promises there. So, of course, the Enterobacterales new breakpoints for piperacillin tazobactam, and this is just to remind me and you that Pseudomonas aeruginosa, there is no change. R more than 16 milligrams per liter remains. Fosfomycin breakpoints to change from 32 to 8/8, and a restriction to E. coli. And then, of course, the introduction of Bacillus and Achromobacter breakpoints. And I think the rest of it is mostly technical stuff. Current ongoing projects. What can you expect next year? Not for the table version 11, but for either addenda during the year or for version 12.0 2022. We've come a long way with Nocardia species breakpoints for disk diffusion. We've basically got all the background material we need. We still need EUCAST to deal with clinical breakpoints for Nocardia. And we've decided to try to achieve whole genome sequencing on the whole collection of more than 120 Nocardia to make absolutely sure that we have the right species identified, and also that we have identified those resistance genes that can be identified. So that's ongoing, and it will not be in time for the next table. So that will be during 2021. Also, together with a lot of laboratories around the world, including CDC and the UK reference laboratories and the Indian reference laboratory, etc., we're putting together a collection of at least 5 different Vibrio species, including Vibrio cholera, Vibrio vulnificus, and Parahemolyticus, and 2 or 3 more, depending on how many of each we can get together. We're doing broth microdilution on all of those. We're going to do Muir-Hinton disk diffusion on relevant agents. And we are pretty sure that for 2022, we will be able to supply you with MIC distributions, with MIC breakpoints, zone diameter distributions, zone diameter calibration, and zone diameter breakpoints, very similar to what we did recently with Burkholderia pseudo-malay, which is published in CMI for anyone who's interested. Again, that was performed in a similar manner. We engaged laboratories and areas where Burkholderia pseudo-malay is a reality. We don't have very many in my lab, to be quite honest, but there are places in the world where they have lots of them. And that project was concluded during 2020. Corynebacterium diphtheria. We do not have today good broth microdilution MIC distributions for Corynebacterium diphtheria. There are groups around Europe who are expert at Corynebacterium diphtheria and have the laboratory capacity to deal with them. We're engaging the Pasteur Institute in Paris and hopefully also the Munich Institute to help us put together at least 200 strains with MIC distributions as a basis for dealing with breakpoints for Corynebacterium diphtheria, and also then zone diameter breakpoints. So that would be ongoing during 2021. I think I may already have told you that disk diffusion of anaerobes is in the cards. The species that are relevant for us are all the Bacteroides species, the Prevotella species, Fusobacterium necrophorum, Clostridium perfringens, and Cutibacterium acnes. These have in common that on the medium we have chosen the fastidious anaerobe agar, FAA, which a lot of you will use in your labs for isolation of anaerobes. Will actually be suitable for disk diffusion and probably also for agar dilution MICs for these species, and will allow a 16 to 20 hour incubation for more than 95 to 99% of the isolates to grow in that time span. So the method is being developed for FAA medium for these species, and the method is specified to a 16 to 20 hour incubation. If that won't do it, then you have to find another way of doing it. The method is very specific for the 16 to 20 hour incubation. There will be an open laboratory trial planned for early 2021, where anyone who's interested can sort of sign up, and you can say, oh, I would like to look at Bacteroides, or I would like to do Fusobacterium necrophorum because that's my pet bug or whatever. and we will organize a broader field trial where lots of laboratories can take part. Hopefully that will be an addendum during 2021, and then all of that will go into the breakpoint table of 2022. Rapid AST directly from blood culture bottles, you will find that on the EUCAST webpage. And some of you have probably already tried it. I know that quite a few have implemented it. There are we're beginning to see papers in different journals where people have implemented the EUCAST Rapid AST. I've just reviewed a few, and they were claimed to be very successful, both in their conclusion and in their data. We have been asked whether or not you can continue to incubate your plate beyond 8 hours if you fail to read at 8 hours for whatever reason. And that is now an ongoing project at the EDL to try to construct, if you like, a table by which and through which you can read results at 16, 20, and possibly 24 hours. We know already now that you cannot use the regular table, and we also know that you cannot use the 8-hour table to interpret your results. So it will have to be a specific and separate table for the 16 to 24-hour results. But that will be part of the Rapid AST tables as they are constructed today. It would probably be 1 or possibly 2 extra tabs for those reading times. So to conclude, before we open for questions, the next EUCAST Zoominar is on the 20th of November. The format is exactly the same. 1 Zoominar at 8, 1 at 1, and 1 at 4 p.m. The subject will then be the new eye, susceptible increased exposure, and also hopefully there will be time to go into the area of technical uncertainty and how to implement that in your laboratory, and for people to ask questions about all of that. If you have questions that you didn't really manage to put forward today, you can go to the EUCAST website and you can use the subject-related contact link that I spoke of earlier. And if that fails for some reason and you would rather send me an email, that's fine too. And you address it to gunnar.carlmeter@eucast.org. So far so good. That ends my presentation, and I now invite you to have comments and questions.
Is there any reason why the cefiderosol breakpoint is set to 4 by CLSI and 2 by EUCAST?
Sorry, which one? Breakpoint? I didn't catch that.
Cefiderosol.
Oh, the cefiderosol.
Yes.
Well, they're 2 separate breakpoint setting processes. You know, CLSI has 1, FDA has 1, and EUCAST has 1 process. And when we assess the scientific background material, our conclusion is what you just said, and their conclusion was different.
Because it seems that the breakpoint at 2 cuts the wild type distribution.
I don't think so. Which document are you looking at then?
That's from the company, Shinogi.
Ah, okay. You need to look at the EUCAST. Have you looked at the EUCAST consultation document?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think if you look at that, you see, one of the problems that we had was that we weren't absolutely happy with the MICs that were conducted earlier on. it turned out that they had different reading instructions for how to read the MICs, and the broth micro-MICs of cefiderocol is not absolutely straightforward. So we were not absolutely happy about how these were read. And specifically, we were not happy with the fact that there were different reading instructions for different investigators. So we redid, together with Shionogi and with their assistants, we repeated a number of MICs and we developed new MIC distributions. And on the basis of those, new reading instructions were organized, and also a new discussion in EUCAST where EMA and Shionogi were involved. And the breakpoint you have from EUCAST is a result of that.
Okay.
So I don't have any questions. I have a comment in the chat from Darian, who has tried the RAST, the rapid AST directly from blood cultures, and who was happy with that. She says it's working very well. Thank you. Thank you, Darian. But I don't have any more questions in the chat. Feel free to pose questions. Anyone else wants to say something or ask something? We have the time.
Maybe I have another question.
Yeah.
In the 2020 breakpoint table, there's a recommendation to report cefaclor as intermediate for pneumococci,
Yep.
a wild type, but there's no high dose for cefaclor.
No, we think you should think about the dose for cefaclor in general and make sure that you give enough. There is no formal high dose for cefaclor, but I'm sure there are people out there who are dosing it, underdosing it. So you need to make sure that you get the right dose. And it's also to signal that pneumococci are not very sensitive, intrinsically very sensitive to cefaclor. As soon as you have a resistance mechanism in the pneumococci, you will be able to continue to use benzyl penicillin for a long time and way up through the scale. But for cefaclor, you immediately lose whatever power you had. So
what would be your dose recommendation?
Oh, I can't remember. I don't have the dosing tab in front of me. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So I have a question from Sebastian van der Velde. Hi, Sebastian. For RAST, the rapid AST in blood culture, from blood cultures, what other antibiotics will be included and by when? That's a good question, Sebastian. The answer is that I can't really give you a good answer because I don't really know yet, but it's obvious that we will have to start developing some of the new agents like imipenem-vobactam, meropenem-vobactam, possibly some of the others. But we're also getting requests for things like amoxicillin, clavulanic acid. So we will have to bring this to the steering committee first quarter 2021, and we need to agree inside the steering committee which antibiotics to take forward. It's important that we take forward antibiotics that are being used as empiric therapy for acute septicemia. And with acute septicemia, I mean patients that sort of step into the ER with signs and symptoms of septicemia, not patients that have been in the hospital for 2 weeks and slowly developed a complication, because then you normally know quite a lot about the patient, but patients which step into the ER with a probable urosepticemia or a staphylococcus septicemia, and then it's important that the RAST antibiotics are among those antibiotics that you would consider for first-line therapy, so that you, as quickly as possible, can get a warning that my empiric therapy is probably not working because of resistance. So that's sort of the hat we need to put on when we discuss how to continue. The other hat we need to put on is that it's a 12-month full-time process every time we add one or a few antibiotics. The development efforts and costs are quite significant. And for this, we're taxing ESCMID money, to be quite honest, which makes it sometimes a bit of a problem, but we shall overcome. I hope that answers your question, Sebastian. Anna Kallio has sent me a question saying, Gunnar, regarding the Vibrio project, is there a published reference method for Vibrios? No, there isn't. A lot of the CLSI methods, were developed in the following way. You had a method for something and you said, what about this bug, Burkholderia cepacia complex? It seems to grow on Eurohinton. What about breakpoints? I don't know, but maybe we can use the Acinetobacter breakpoints. And we don't want to do that. So we are actually developing dedicated methods for each new species. And there is an order to things. We always start with Eurohinton straight without any additions. We try to make that work. We want the bugs to grow well, because you can't perform AST unless the bug grows well. So 90% or more of the isolates need to grow really well. If that doesn't do it, then we go to Eurohinton F, that is used for fastidious organisms. And then if that won't do it, then we move on to FAA. And the 3 agars that we have now so far characterized for EUCAST susceptibility testing are have so far sufficed. And we haven't had to develop more, let's say, exotic agars with more exotic add-ons. So bugs like Burkholderia pseudomallei, for example, grows very well on Eurohinton straight. Bacillus grows very well on Eurohinton straight. Chromobacter grow very well on Eurohinton straight. And when we test the 5 Vibrio species that we have access to, so far, they all grow very well on Eurohinton without additions. So by default, and if that holds true, Eurohinton without additions will be the reference method for Vibrio, and broth microdilution will be the reference method for developing MICs, and disc diffusion, according to EUCAST, will be the standardized method for everyday susceptibility testing. We have tried some strains and we see no problem so far. There is a problem with, this is from Microbiology Lab to everyone. There is a problem with sulfamethoxazole trimethoprim IV supplied by the industry. Oh, I didn't know that. What is your recommendation for Stenotrophomonas? Well, the only agent that has breakpoints in EUCAST for Stenotrophomonas currently is trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole. So that is the only recommendation I can give. Then there are a number of colleagues out there who will try a number of things, such as ceftazidime or moxifloxacin and God knows what, and combinations. And there is no way today that we can test these with a reference method, except to say we can get some sort of an MIC out of a broth microdilution test, but we're not absolutely certain what that means. Cefiderocol has very low MICs for Stenotrophomonas multifilia, but there weren't enough clinical background material and data to permit us to set breakpoints for Cefiderocol. But I suppose that I would recommend that in a very tight spot where nothing else works, and where the patient is allergic to trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, or you can't get hold of the agent, I suppose my advice would be to say, try testing Cefiderocol and find out whether the isolate is wild type or non-wild type. And we have the distributions to permit that evaluation, so you can contact us to have some help in that case. Mandy Wotton in Cardiff has asked, where are we with developing breakpoints for Astrianum and avibactam? And I think the straight answer is we're not very far, and that boils down to the company not having made very much progress with the agent, and they haven't contacted us to ask us to help them develop neither breakpoints nor disk diffusion. Dale Clash from Oxoid to everyone. She says, hi Gunnar, if we consider rapid AST for acute septicemia, is there a limited list of empiric treatment options for adults and pediatrics? Are you looking to publish breakpoints for omadacycline and aravacycline? And I think the answer to the first question, is there a dedicated limited list for empiric therapy? No, I don't think there is, because it will differ from country to country. Traditions differ, antimicrobial resistance rates differ, and it's just not possible to have a very totally common list of empiric therapy. But I do think that there are some antibiotics that everyone would agree are important, such as piperacillin and tazobactam, a carbapenem, possibly an aminoglycoside, probably cefotaxime, ceftazidime, and then some people will want this and others will want that. And for example, Mandy, the UK would very much like to have amoxicillin clavulanic acid, but the UK is almost the only country with that request. So it does differ from country to country. And then stewardship teams have started making inroads in what you can and what you should and what you should not use. And that sort of clutters up the map a little bit as well. So as I said, we need to have a common opinion in the steering committee about which agents to promote and which agents to prioritize for future development work in RAST. And I don't think aravacycline and omadacycline are going to be very high on that list, to be quite honest.
I have another question to cefiderocol testing.
Cefiderocol, yeah.
Could you comment why there's no need to reduce the iron content during disk diffusion?
Yes, for some reason it turns out that the iron content is only important when it comes to the MIC, and that's because the iron content will rock the MIC. So depending on how much iron you have in the broth, when you do your MIC test, you will get different MICs. Once you've decided how much iron you should have in your broth, and once you've decided what the MICs should be, and that sort of takes us back to your discussion about 2 and 4 and the reading of these tests. But once you have decided what is the correct MIC, then you can develop a disk test, which is basically a surrogate test which can predict the MIC that you've decided is the right MIC. And that's why you don't need to manipulate the iron content for the disk test, because that has already been done in the MIC test. And the only job that the disk test has to do is to predict the MIC in the MIC test. So it's important in the MIC test, but it doesn't at all affect the disk test. Is that clear?
Not really.
No, both tests are relative. There is no such thing as an MIC value handed down to the bacterium by Godfather or Allah or whoever. You can manipulate the MIC any way you like by changing anything from the incubation time to the inoculum to the pH, blah, 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 but also the iron content of some agents. So for cefiderocol, iron content is very important as to what MIC you will obtain when you do the test. But once you've decided what the correct, within brackets, MIC is, then all you need to do with the disk test is to correlate your zone diameters to whatever MICs of different isolates and bugs that you have. And then you have a trustworthy, if you're lucky, a trustworthy DIST test. And quite honestly, if you want to do sulfhydrycol susceptibility testing, I would recommend that unless you're really expert and know exactly what you do with broth micro and iron depletion and iron content and God knows what, stick to the DIST test. It actually works really well. It's very easy to do the DIST test, and provided you have a reasonable calibration of your laboratory work, the DIST test will do fine. Much easier than piperazine and tazobactam, to be quite honest. So I'm looking at the chat. No more questions in the chat right now. I'm trying to see whether there was something I missed. We've dealt with the Vibrio, trimethoprim sulfametoxazole, the RAS. No, I don't think there is anything else. We still have 2 minutes, still time for one more question if anyone has one. So to conclude, thank you very much for attending. As I said, this has been recorded with any luck. I made that work, and I will put the recording out for those who would like to see that because they missed the opportunity, which means that you can advertise this to your colleagues. And then, of course, I'll have another seminar very similar to this one at 1600. And then hopefully I'll see you again on the 20th of November. And then you can harass me with all your frustration about the susceptible increased exposure category and the ATU. And I, for one, shall look forward to that session. So I hope you guys look forward to that as well. So thank you very much. It's now almost 2 o'clock. It's actually 2 o'clock. So thank you for today. And thank you for attending. Bye-bye.